Relax and let the world outside grow distant. Feel yourself sinking into the stillness of your room, as though time itself has slowed. A gentle hush surrounds you, the quiet rhythm of your own breath, and with every inhale and exhale, you are drifting deeper into a calm, safe space. Welcome to tonight's story. Tonight, we are going to polish the corners of your mind, slowly and gently, while we wander together into the dim candlelight of another century. The title is The Drug That Turned Victorian Women into Maniacs. Close your eyes if you wish, and imagine a world of flickering gas lamps, of creaking wooden floors, of rustling petticoats and soft whispers behind heavy velvet curtains. This is the Victorian era, Britain in the 19th century, where medicine was as mysterious as it was dangerous, and where women were prescribed things that soothed, but also destroyed. Picture a London street, the year perhaps 1845. The air smells faintly of smoke from coal fires, and carriages rattle by on uneven cobblestones. Women in long dresses hurry across damp streets, their boots splashing through puddles. Behind lace curtains in well-furnished drawing rooms, bottles of amber liquid stand quietly, their glass glinting in the candlelight. These bottles, often unlabeled to the untrained eye, contained laudanum. Laudanum, a mixture of alcohol and opium. It was sold freely in chemist shops, and it was considered a cure for almost everything. Now, imagine yourself slowly walking into one of those chemists. The shelves are dark wood, lined with jars and vials, some filled with powders, some with dark syrups. The air is heavy with the scent of herbs, dust, and something sharp, like vinegar. The apothecary greets you with a nod, and when you ask for relief from sleeplessness, or from nerves, or from the vague and mysterious condition they called hysteria, he will hand you a small bottle. Inside, a reddish-brown liquid that promises calm. The women of Victorian Britain took it eagerly, for headaches, for menstrual pain, for sadness they could not name, for loneliness in quiet houses where husbands were absent, or children were gone, or where society pressed too tightly upon them. Laudanum promised peace, and for a time it delivered. But the peace had a price. As the weeks turned into months, and the doses grew stronger, the women changed. Their hands trembled when the bottle was out of reach. Their eyes darted strangely in conversation. They laughed when laughter was not fitting, or wept without reason. Families whispered that they were losing their minds. But society did not blame the medicine. Instead, they blamed the women. And so the story begins. Now, as you listen, let your breath deepen. Feel the rise and fall of your chest, like the quiet tide of a distant sea. The more you settle, the more clearly you can walk with me through the streets of that time. The story will unfold slowly, gently, like turning the pages of a very old book. We will wander not only through Britain, but also across to Europe and even America, where these drugs traveled, shaping lives in similar ways. We will pause to consider how doctors thought, how society judged, and how women, caught between science and superstition, were slowly unraveled. The crackle of a hearth fire in a quiet drawing room, the ticking of a long case clock, the sound of rain tapping on a window pane. Let these be your companions as the story takes its first careful steps. Laudanum. Opium dissolved in wine or spirits. It was easy to buy, cheap and fashionable. And then later cocaine too. Powdered, refined, hailed as a miracle for fatigue and melancholy. Together, these substances wove themselves into the lives of countless women. They gave comfort, but also madness. Tonight we will explore their story. And as we begin, remember, you are safe. You are warm. You are listening to history, but you are drifting too, floating softly toward rest. Breathe slowly. Imagine yourself seated in a deep, cushioned chair, perhaps in an old Victorian parlor. The wallpaper is patterned with faded flowers, the colors muted by years of coal smoke. A small fire burns in the grate, the light flickering gently against the brass fender. You can hear the faint clinking of porcelain cups as tea is poured in the next room. It is evening. Outside, fog curls around the lampposts, turning the streets into a dreamlike blur. Now listen closely as we step further into this story. The 19th century was an age of contradictions. It was an era of strict morals, tightly laced corsets, and carefully polished manners. And yet, behind those closed doors, the air was often heavy with smoke, with drink, and with the bittersweet haze of opium. Doctors of the time had only a partial understanding of the human body, and an even weaker grasp of the mind. When a woman complained of fainting spells, of nervous tension, of sadness or anger, or even simple exhaustion, the diagnosis was nearly always the same word: hysteria. A word that became a convenient label, an umbrella for nearly every complaint a woman could have. And for hysteria, the cure was laudanum. Picture a lady. Let us call her Eleanor. She lives in a respectable London townhouse. Her husband is away on business for weeks at a time, and the silence of the rooms weighs heavily upon her. She suffers headaches, a racing heart, restless nights. She visits her physician, who listens only briefly, nodding gravely, and then prescribes a tincture. A few drops in water 3 times a day, he instructs. She pays, she returns home, she follows the instructions. First, it is miraculous. The headaches soften into mist. The heart slows. Sleep comes more easily. She feels calm. She feels cared for. She begins to trust the bottle more than she trusts her own body. Soon she takes not 10 drops but 20. Not 3 times a day but 5. Each time she feels the dark thoughts creeping near, she reaches for the vial. Weeks pass. Her laughter grows louder, almost shrill, at small amusements. She forgets conversations. She drops cups from trembling hands. Servants whisper in the kitchen. The mistress has changed. She is not herself. But when the doctor is called again, he shakes his head and says simply, "Such is the nature of hysteria. Continue the laudanum." And so Eleanor drifts deeper. She is not alone. All across Britain, thousands of women, rich and poor alike, find themselves in the same embrace. Laudanum was not expensive. A bottle could be bought at almost any chemist's shop, even by a servant with a few coins in her pocket. Mothers gave it to restless babies. Husbands bought it for wives. Writers and poets praised it for stirring strange, dreamlike visions. And the women of the era, bound by society to silence, found in it a strange companion. But society was blind to the truth. The women who became erratic, unstable, maniacal in the eyes of their families were not victims of madness. They were victims of the medicine. Let the fire crackle a little louder in your imagination. See Eleanor seated by her window, staring out at the rain. Her bottle rests on the table beside her, the liquid inside dark as amber. Each sip pulls her further into a haze. Her husband returns home at last, and he finds her changed. Her eyes are wide, her speech uneven, her temper unpredictable. He tells her she must compose herself, that she must pray, that she must find discipline. But he does not take the bottle away. For in that age medicine was authority, and the authority was rarely questioned. The air of the Victorian home, with its polished furniture and ticking clocks, concealed countless small tragedies like Eleanor's. To imagine them is to imagine an entire society breathing quietly beneath the weight of something toxic, something invisible. Now imagine yourself drifting deeper into that atmosphere. The fog on the streets thickens, the gas lamps burn low. Inside the chemist's shop, another woman waits in line. She is younger, perhaps newly married, perhaps already carrying the invisible burden of expectations. She buys her bottle too. And so the cycle continues. Laudanum, mixed of alcohol and opium, did not discriminate. It dulled pain, it eased sorrow, but it also enslaved. And when the women began to act strangely, when they laughed too loudly or wept too often, when they raged or fainted or became unmanageable, society declared them ill. Not the medicine. The word maniac clung to them. Cruel word. A word whispered at dinner tables and written in diaries. Yet the true madness was in the culture that gave them poison and called it a cure. Breathe in slowly and feel the weight of that contradiction. A society outwardly so polished, inwardly so fragile. Women bound in layers of silk and lace, bound also in expectations, and bound again in chains of chemical dependence. And as you hold that image, let yourself sink a little deeper, as though you too are drifting through time, walking quietly through those narrow streets where every shadow holds another story. Let yourself rest more deeply now. Imagine the steady rhythm of a carriage wheel on cobblestones. A lull that rocks you gently, gently, as though you are drifting on quiet waters. That sound, that sway, becomes the background as we continue our long story. In the heart of the 19th century, the word laudanum passed softly between lips in parlors, sick rooms, and even nurseries. It was a household name, no more alarming than tea or coffee. And yet, hidden within its depths, it carried the same essence that fueled wars in faraway lands. Opium. Opium itself was not new. For centuries, it had traveled across empires, from the poppy fields of Asia to the markets of Europe. The British Empire, hungry for trade and power, had woven it into the very fabric of global commerce. Ships sailed across oceans, carrying tea, silk, and also opium. Wars were fought over it. And yet, in quiet British homes, its presence was far more personal. It was in a spoonful of syrup, a glass of cordial, a dose before bed. Women, in particular, bore its touch. Let us return to Eleanor for a moment. Picture her now in the drawing room, the curtains drawn against the damp evening. She sits, needlework forgotten in her lap. The grandfather clock ticks steadily. On the table, her laudanum. She takes it not only for her headaches now, but for her moods, for her long silences, for the moments when her thoughts spiral into loneliness. Each dose takes her away from herself. Soon the boundaries blur. Is the trembling in her hands from illness, or from the medicine? Is her laughter too loud because of some inner storm, or because the opium loosens her restraint? To her husband, to her doctor, it appears simply as madness. The word mania begins to whisper around her. She is not alone. In Manchester, in York, in small villages by the sea, other women fall into the same pattern. Some are wives of merchants, others the daughters of farmers. Some cradle infants in the night, giving them spoonfuls of Godfrey's cordial, a popular children's medicine laced with opium, to keep them quiet. The babies sleep too deeply, sometimes never waking. The mothers weep, but are told by neighbors that such things are the will of God, not the fault of the cordial. In Edinburgh, a young woman named Margaret might be studying by lamplight, preparing her embroidery, when a wave of exhaustion overtakes her. Her mother offers her a dose of laudanum, as naturally as one might offer water. Soon, Margaret feels her thoughts slipping, her vision softening, her limbs growing heavy, and she too begins the long descent. The air of the Victorian era was thick with silence. To speak openly of despair, of desire, of dissatisfaction, was considered improper. Women especially had few outlets for their emotions. Thus, the medicine became their voice, their escape, their comfort, but also their trap. Pause here, and picture a parlor filled with faint golden light, a group of women gathered for tea. Their conversation is polite, careful. Beneath their words, however, lies a hidden sameness. Each one of them, in her own way, relies on the small bottle kept in her home. Each one carries a secret haze in her eyes, a tremor in her hands, and none dare speak of it. Breathe slowly now, and let that image settle. The clinking of teacups, the rustling of skirts, the soft murmur of voices, all underlined by an invisible thread of addiction. The doctors, meanwhile, wrote long treatises on female disorders. They catalogued symptoms: fainting fits, nervous tension, uncontrollable laughter, sudden tears. They prescribed the same remedy over and over, never suspecting, or perhaps never admitting, that the cure itself was the cause. By the 1870s, medical journals occasionally mentioned laudanum habit. Some physicians began to whisper about dependence, about the strange mania that overtook their patients. But these were soft warnings, lost amid louder praise for the drug's benefits. And so the cycle continued. Let us walk further across the Channel to France. There too, in Parisian salons and provincial cottages, opium tinctures were sold. French women, celebrated for their elegance, also sought solace in the same amber bottles. Writers described them in novels, sometimes glamorized, sometimes pitted. The madness of laudanum was not confined to Britain. It spread across Europe like a quiet shadow, and then across the ocean to America. In the United States, laudanum was just as common. Housewives in rural towns, miles from doctors, used it for every ailment. Civil War soldiers returned home addicted, their wives often following the same path. By the late 19th century, one estimate suggested that the majority of opium addicts in America were women. Imagine that. The quiet epidemic, hidden in plain sight. Now, as you picture these women, Eleanor, Margaret, the countless unnamed, let yourself drift a little deeper into stillness. Hear the soft ticking of a clock. Feel the warmth of a fire. Smell the faint sweetness of poppies in the air. The world of the Victorians was heavy with such sensations, and within them lay the seeds of both comfort and destruction. It was not only laudanum, of course. By the end of the century, another substance rose to prominence: cocaine. It was hailed as invigorating, a miracle against fatigue. Doctors praised it, even Sigmund Freud wrote in its favor. Women were told it would bring energy, sharpen their spirits, cure their depression. But like laudanum before it, cocaine carried its own price. Sleeplessness, paranoia, frenzied behavior, mania once more. The pattern was repeating. In dimly lit bedrooms, in quiet kitchens, in the very heart of family life, these drugs became silent companions. They turned women into what society called maniacs, though in truth the mania was born not of their nature but of the substances forced upon them. Take a slow breath, and imagine this web of lives stretched across the world. London, Paris, New York. All connected by the thread of a single dangerous cure. And we are only at the beginning of the tale. Let your body grow heavier now, as if you are wrapped in a thick velvet blanket. The sound of the outside world fades. Only the story remains, quiet and steady, like the echo of a gentle lullaby. We have walked through the foggy streets of London. We have paused in drawing rooms and parlors, and we have seen the quiet bottles of laudanum resting on polished wooden tables. But the story deepens when we look at how society itself shaped these events. Victorian Britain was strict. Women were expected to be calm, obedient, and gentle, the angel in the house, as one poet called them. Any deviation from that role, any show of anger or passion, was seen as a flaw, a sickness. And so, when a woman cried too often, or refused her duties, or simply grew restless, the label was quick to follow: hysteria. And what was the answer to hysteria? The bottle. Always the bottle. Imagine Eleanor again, though now she is joined by hundreds of other women. They sit in their homes, they walk through gardens, they rock children to sleep. Some are wealthy, some poor, but their bottles are the same. A dark, sweet liquid that promises peace. Picture the chemist's shop once more. A man in a stiff white apron stands behind the counter. A woman enters, her eyes a little tired, her hands folded neatly in her gloves. She whispers her request, barely audible. The chemist nods, turns to the shelf, selects a vial. The exchange is quick, discreet. She slips it into her bag and leaves. On the street no one notices. It is as ordinary as buying sugar or flour. But behind closed doors, the transformation unfolds. First, the drug softens everything. The rough edges of daily life seem smoother. Loneliness feels lighter. Pain recedes. But soon the body asks for more. The mind, too, leans on the haze. And when the haze thickens, behavior changes. Some women grew loud, excitable, laughing at nothing. Others became withdrawn, staring into corners, weeping at shadows. Some raged, throwing objects across rooms, frightening husbands and children. Others wandered the streets at night, their minds no longer tethered. The newspapers began to describe female lunacy, but they did not connect it to the bottle that stood on every bedside table. In the countryside it was no different. Villages had their own chemists, their own shelves of laudanum. Farmers' wives used it to ease the strain of hard labor. Young women used it for sleepless nights. Old women used it for aches in their bones. The fields outside were filled with poppies, red and delicate, but in the small glass vials they became something far darker. Take a slow breath and picture those fields. The gentle sway of the poppy flowers in the summer breeze. The faint hum of bees. It is beautiful, peaceful. And yet, within those blossoms lies the essence of a substance that altered lives forever. Meanwhile, in literature, the drug made its quiet appearance. Writers, Coleridge, De Quincey, spoke openly of opium's dreamy powers. Their words painted pictures of visions and fantasies, of strange journeys of the mind. Readers were fascinated. What was dangerous in the sickroom seemed glamorous in poetry. Women, too, were drawn by the allure of a world where dreams could be sipped from a bottle. But dreams turned quickly to nightmares. Eleanor, in her quiet parlor, begins to forget herself. Her speech becomes tangled, her hands restless. She stares too long at the fire, as though she sees things in the flames. Servants whisper. Friends stop visiting. Her husband grows stern. The word maniac follows her now, whispered behind her back, written in private notes. And yet, even as she unravels, the doctor prescribes more. Across the Atlantic in America, similar scenes played out. The Civil War had left thousands of men addicted to morphine, and as medical knowledge spread, women too began to follow. Housewives in isolated towns relied on the bottles to soothe their nerves. Mothers gave their children syrups laced with opium. The drug became part of the rhythm of daily life, invisible and unquestioned. By the late 19th century, estimates suggested that the majority of opium addicts in the United States were not soldiers or criminals, but respectable women. Women trapped in quiet houses, burdened with silence, turning again and again to the bottle. Now imagine the quiet sound of a rocking chair. Back and forth, back and forth. The creak of wood, the whisper of fabric. A woman rocks slowly, her bottle in her lap. The room around her fades. She is neither here nor there. The world calls her unstable, but in truth, she is only a reflection of the poison she has been given. Doctors wrote of hysteria, of mania, of lunacy. But what they described were the symptoms of their own medicine. The cure was the cause. Breathe deeply now, and let that thought settle. The ticking of the clock grows slower in your mind. The fire burns low. The story stretches out, long and heavy, like the slow turning of seasons. The Victorian woman, wrapped in lace, sitting beneath portraits of ancestors, holding her small bottle of laudanum. She was not mad. She was not hysterical. She was a victim of a society that silenced her, medicated her, and then condemned her when the medicine turned against her. And so the quiet epidemic grew. Across Britain, across Europe, across America, women slipped further into the haze. Some were hidden away in asylums. Others lived their lives in restless dependence. Their voices were lost, their stories unspoken, until history looked back and saw the pattern. And tonight, as you drift deeper into rest, we walk slowly through those forgotten rooms, listening to the echoes of their lives. Settle yourself even more deeply now. Feel as though you are sinking slowly into a warm feather bed, each word wrapping around you like soft layers of comfort. Outside your window, picture the faint rustle of leaves, a gentle night breeze stirring them, whispering secrets of forgotten times. The story continues, and with each detail, you drift further into calm. We have seen Eleanor in her parlor, Margaret in Edinburgh, countless unnamed women across Britain and America. Now let us turn to the wider stage. The world of medicine itself, and the beliefs that shaped this strange dependence. In the 19th century, medicine was still halfway between science and superstition. Doctors wore fine suits, carried polished instruments, spoke with authority, but much of what they practiced was guesswork. Bloodletting was still common, leeches still applied, strange tonics and tinctures prescribed. To complain of pain, of nervousness, of melancholy, was to invite experimentation. And for women, almost always, the verdict was the same: hysteria. The word comes from the Greek hystera, meaning womb. For centuries, physicians believed that women's mental and emotional troubles came from their wombs wandering inside the body. By the Victorian era, the theory had changed somewhat, but the word remained, a catch-all for anything that did not fit neat categories. If a woman fainted, if she grew restless, if she resisted her role, she was hysterical. And so, the cure laudanum. Imagine now a doctor's office in 1850. The room is paneled in dark wood. Books line the shelves, thick leather-bound volumes with Latin titles. A woman sits nervously in a chair, her gloved hands twisting in her lap. She describes her sleepless nights, her mood swings, her headaches. The doctor nods gravely, then reaches for a drawer. He takes out a small bottle, writes a neat label, and instructs her to take it daily. He believes he has done well. She believes she has hope. Neither sees the trap. Back in her home, she begins the routine. Drops in water, swallowed quickly. Relief comes. She feels calmer, lighter. She sleeps. She trusts the doctor. Days pass. Weeks. Soon the relief grows shorter, the need sharper. She increases the dose. Her behavior begins to change, but she hides it as long as she can. And when it is noticed, the blame falls not on the bottle, but on her. Let your breath deepen as you imagine this cycle repeating in household after household. The same scene, endlessly mirrored across the cities and towns. A society convinced it was treating illness, when in fact it was creating it. By the 1860s, medical journals began to notice curious patterns. Women who had taken laudanum for years seemed unable to stop. Their bodies wasted away. Their minds grew clouded. Some grew frantic, desperate when deprived of the drug. Others slipped into a constant stupor. The term opium habit appeared in print, a faint warning. But even then, the drug was too deeply woven into daily life to be easily questioned. Meanwhile, the public imagination began to weave stories. Newspapers printed tales of women who had gone mad, their lives ruined by mysterious ailments. Novels hinted at characters who carried secret bottles, their hands trembling as they poured. The image of the laudanum addict crept quietly into culture, but always as a private shame, never as a public scandal. Let us walk now into one of those novels. Picture a dimly lit bedroom, the curtains heavy with dust, the smell of medicine in the air. A woman sits at her dressing table, a candle burning low. She lifts a vial, pours a measure into her glass, and drinks. Her reflection in the mirror is pale, her eyes distant. The reader senses the tragedy, but the character cannot escape. The bottle is her comfort, her doom. Breathe slowly, and imagine that mirror. Imagine the faint tremor of her hand, the flicker of the flame, the silence of the room. It is a scene repeated in reality, over and over, behind countless closed doors. And beyond laudanum, other forms of opium spread as well. Morphine, isolated and refined, became a favorite among doctors. It was injected, a modern miracle of science. Yet it too ensnared its patients. Women especially prescribed morphine for childbirth pain, for menstrual discomfort, for vague nerves. Found themselves trapped. What began as relief became dependency. By the late 19th century, cocaine joined the stage. Unlike laudanum, cocaine was seen as invigorating, not sedating. It gave bursts of energy, confidence, euphoria. Doctors hailed it as a cure for depression, fatigue, even shyness. Women were encouraged to take it to brighten their moods, to overcome their delicate constitutions. Imagine a fashionable lady in Paris, 1885. She attends a salon, her eyes bright, her speech quick, her laughter sharp. Friends praise her vivacity. She carries a small vial of powder, discreetly tucked away. Later that night alone she takes more. Sleep will not come. Her mind races. Her hands shake. In the morning she is exhausted, but the cycle begins again. Cocaine mania, laudanum haze. Two sides of the same coin. Both turning women into what society called unstable, hysterical, maniacal. Both encouraged by the very men who claimed to heal them. Take another slow breath. Picture the contrast. The serene image of the Victorian lady, dressed in silks, seated gracefully at her tea table. And beneath that image, the hidden reality of trembling hands, clouded thoughts, secret bottles. A world polished on the surface, poisoned underneath. The tragedy is not only in the drugs themselves, but in the way society turned its gaze. Instead of asking why so many women suffered, instead of questioning the medicine, it was easier to point the finger at the women. To call them weak, unstable, prone to madness. To lock some away in asylums. To shame others into silence. And so history recorded them not as victims, but as maniacs. Let that thought sink deeper. The injustice of it. The quiet cruelty. The long nights filled with restless sleep. The mornings clouded with fog. The endless days where the bottle was the only companion. An entire generation of women painted as hysterical, when in truth they were casualties of a flawed medical age. The clock ticks softly in the background. The fire burns low. The breeze outside whispers through the leaves. You are drifting with the story, carried gently into the past, into the rooms and streets where all this unfolded. And the story continues, stretching long into the night. Settle deeper now. Your body is heavy, yet your mind floats lightly, as though the story itself is carrying you. Each breath is slow, each word softer than the last. The tale moves forward deeper into the twilight of history. By the 1880s, whispers had become louder. Doctors could no longer ignore the growing evidence of addiction. Some medical journals began to publish warnings, cautioning against the overuse of opiates. Yet the bottles kept appearing on pharmacy shelves, still wrapped in elegant labels, still sold without real restrictions. Pharmacists themselves profited greatly. Their shops, lit by gas lamps, with polished counters and neat displays, were the gateways to this hidden world. Step inside, and you would find rows of jars, powders, tinctures, all promising relief. Housewives entered quietly, purchased their supply, and left unnoticed. There was no scandal in buying medicine. No shame in seeking a cure. The shame came later, when the cure became a prison. Let your imagination wander into one such shop. Smell the faint bitterness of herbs and chemicals. Hear the scratch of the pen as the pharmacist notes down a sale. See the gleam of the glass bottles under the light. A lady enters, her veil drawn low, her steps quick. She asks in a hushed voice for laudanum. The pharmacist nods, prepares the vial, and she departs. Another transaction, another life drawn into the circle. Society was not blind. Satirical cartoons began to appear in newspapers, depicting women with glassy eyes, swooning in their chairs, or clutching bottles with desperate fingers. Some essays even suggested that entire classes of women, especially the middle and upper, were sinking into hidden addiction. But instead of sympathy, the tone was often mocking, cruel. The addicted woman was portrayed as ridiculous, unstable, almost monstrous. Picture such a cartoon now. Exaggerated wide eyes, trembling hands, a fainting posture. The joke was at her expense. Never at the doctors, never at the pharmacists, never at the society that had made her so. And yet behind closed doors the suffering was real. Take another slow breath. Imagine a large Victorian house at night. The family has gone to bed. Servants move quietly through the halls. In one locked room, a woman sits awake. On her table, a candle burns low, the wax dripping. Beside it, a half-empty bottle of laudanum. She takes a sip, her hand trembling. The relief comes, but it is weaker now. The shadows around her grow long, her thoughts blurred. She tries to write in her diary, but the words trail off into nonsense. She lays her head down, half asleep, half dreaming. In her haze, the world feels both terrifying and distant. This was the silent life of thousands. Some women slipped so far into dependency that they became what doctors described as maniacs. Their moods unpredictable, their tempers fierce, their actions irrational. In reality, Their brains and bodies were struggling under the heavy fog of opium. But to society, they seemed like proof of long-held beliefs. That women were weaker, more emotional, less rational. The drug did not just change their minds. It reinforced old prejudices. And so the cycle deepened. By the turn of the century, a new wave of reform began. The dangers of narcotics were becoming too obvious to ignore. In America, the first laws restricting opium and morphine began to appear in the 1890s. Britain followed slowly, but the change was underway. No longer could these drugs be sold as freely as tea or sugar. Bottles began to require prescriptions. Quantities were limited. Warnings were printed. But by then the damage was done. An entire generation of women had lived, and in many cases died, under the shadow of the bottle. Breathe deeper. Imagine now a graveyard, quiet, fog rolling between the stones. Many of those buried there were women in their 40s, 50s, lives cut short. Their death certificates spoke vaguely of consumption, nervous collapse, decline. Rarely did the truth appear in ink. Laudanum, morphine, opium. But the silence of the record does not erase the reality. Some survived, though scarred. Their diaries, when found, revealed the constant battle between the need for relief and the dread of dependence. Pages filled with apologies, with confessions of weakness, with promises to quit that never held. Reading them today is like hearing faint voices through the veil of time, whispers of women who struggled alone. Let your breath soften further, as if you are listening to those whispers now. Hear the quiet scratch of pen on paper, the sigh of frustration, the soft sob muffled in the night. These were not maniacs. These were women caught in a net woven by ignorance, medicine, and society. And yet, even in tragedy, something shifted. The recognition of addiction as a medical issue, not just a moral failing, slowly grew. The early 20th century brought stricter controls, better understanding. Pain relief did not vanish, but the careless prescribing of laudanum and morphine began to fade. The age of the Victorian maniac woman ended, leaving behind stories, warnings, and shadows. Now, as you drift with this history, feel yourself sinking deeper into calm. The tale may be grim, but the telling is soft, gentle, almost like a lullaby. The sound of history is the sound of distant footsteps, of fading whispers, of old pages turning slowly in the dark. And with each turn, you grow heavier, sleepier, drifting into the same silence where those forgotten voices rest. Close your eyes now. Feel the weight of the blanket around you, warm and comforting. Let your breath become slower, smoother. The story is still unfolding, like a candle burning low in a silent Victorian parlor. Shadows stretch across the walls, and the night deepens. We have walked through the streets of London, through the chemist shops, through the quiet despair of women who turned to laudanum for relief. But now, let us linger for a while, not on the tragedy, but on the quiet details of their world. Imagine a sitting room in the year 1875. Heavy drapes block out the evening fog. A clock ticks steadily on the mantel. The lady of the house reclines on a chaise lounge, her dress flowing in folds of silk. On the table beside her rests an open book, unread. Her eyes are distant. Her hand rests lightly on a glass of water, darkened by a few drops of tincture. She sips, sighs, and sinks back into silence. In that silence, her thoughts wander. Perhaps she dreams of childhood gardens, of sunlight on fields, of laughter long forgotten. The laudanum opens the door to memory, but it also clouds it. Her dreams feel vivid but slippery. She cannot quite grasp them when she wakes. Now, imagine her daughter, only 16, watching from the doorway. The girl sees her mother's strange behavior, sometimes calm, sometimes irritable, sometimes laughing too loudly. She does not understand. She only knows that the bottle is always there, like a quiet companion that never leaves. In time, the daughter too may inherit the same habit, the same dependence. And so, one generation passes the shadow to the next. Let your breath follow the rhythm of that ticking clock. Tick, Tock, tick, tock, each sound pulling you deeper into calm. It was not only in London or even only in Britain. Across the ocean in America, laudanum and morphine flowed just as freely. Housewives in New England, farmers' wives in the Midwest, Southern belles in their mansions, all found themselves reaching for the same dark relief. It was cheaper than whiskey, easier to obtain than medical care. Bottles filled with amber liquid sat in cupboards from Boston to New Orleans. The problem was vast but hidden. Doctors in the United States began to notice it as early as the 1860s, especially after the Civil War. Morphine was used heavily to treat soldiers' pain, and many returned addicted. Their wives, too, often shared the habit. Quietly, discreetly, whole communities carried the weight of opiate dependence. Picture a farmhouse in the Midwest, far from the noise of cities. Snow falls outside, covering the fields in silence. Inside, a woman stirs the fire, then sits wearily at the table. From a small wooden cabinet, she takes out a bottle. She pours a few drops into a tin cup, drinks, and waits for the warmth to spread through her veins. For her, this is not luxury, it is survival. The isolation, the endless labor, the grief of children lost to fever, all of it weighs too heavily, and the bottle lifts it, if only for an hour. Now, breathe slowly and imagine that farmhouse. The creak of the wooden floor, the faint hiss of the fire, the distant howl of wind across the plains. The woman sits alone, her thoughts softened, her grief blurred. She is not a maniac. She is not hysterical. She is simply caught in the embrace of a drug the world did not yet understand. And so, the story stretches across continents. Britain, America, even parts of Europe. Everywhere the pattern repeats. Women in lace, women in cotton, women in poverty, women in wealth. All touched by the same quiet epidemic. The irony was sharp. The very society that demanded women remain composed, graceful, and obedient was also the society that fed them a medicine that unraveled those qualities. The more dependent they became, the more they were criticized. The cure was the cause. The victim was the accused. Let yourself drift on that thought. Society creating its own ghosts, then fearing them. Women called maniacs, when in truth they were prisoners of the cure. By the dawn of the 20th century, whispers of reform grew into voices. Campaigns began, laws were drafted, the dangers were acknowledged. Slowly, the bottles vanished from shelves. Slowly, the fog began to clear. But the scars remained. In the diaries of women, in the letters of doctors, in the unspoken memories passed down through families. Breathe in once more. And imagine those diaries. Leather-bound, tucked away in trunks, their pages yellowed with age. Words written in delicate ink. I am so tired. The drops help me. I fear I cannot stop. These voices are faint now, like echoes across a century, but they are still there, waiting to be heard. And tonight, as you listen, you have heard them. Let the rustle of pages fade. Let the fire burn lower. Let the house grow quieter. You are drifting with the story, not toward frenzy, but toward rest. For the tale, though heavy, has become a lullaby. Slow, soft, endless. Relax again. Feel the softness of your pillow beneath your head, the warmth around your body. Each word drifts toward you like a feather, slow, light, and soothing. The story deepens, and with it, your calm. As the Victorian age moved forward, the paradox of laudanum became more visible. The very same substance that soothed pain was the one causing it. A double-edged comfort. The women who consumed it were not only numbed physically, but also emotionally, spiritually, socially. Imagine walking into a Victorian hospital ward. Long rows of iron beds stretch across the room. Pale women lie under thin blankets, their faces gaunt, their eyes restless. Nurses move quietly between them, carrying trays of bottles. The air is heavy with a scent of alcohol, disinfectant, and something darker, the faint, sweet bitterness of opium. In the hush of that room, you can almost hear the sighs of relief as drops are given. and the quiet cries of despair when the effects fade. Some doctors began to keep records of these women. Case studies, they called them. The notes described patients who laughed at inappropriate times, who shouted without warning, who wept uncontrollably. The doctors wrote these observations in cold, detached language, as though documenting a curious experiment. Rarely did they write of the humanity of these women, of their longing for relief, of their desperation. To the medical eye, they were hysterics, maniacs, subjects. Now imagine yourself holding one of those casebooks. The pages are stiff, the ink faded. You read line after line. Patient exhibits erratic mood swings. Patient reports seeing visions. Patient becomes violent when medicine withheld. The words feel clinical, but beneath them is the quiet suffering of real women. Their voices hidden, their pain misinterpreted. Breathe slowly and feel that weight. The term hysteria itself was a cage. Any woman who did not fit the mold of calm, obedient, silent femininity could be labeled hysterical. Too much laughter. Hysteria. Too many tears. Hysteria. Too much anger. Certainly hysteria. And for hysteria, there was only one answer: laudanum, morphine, or another opiate. The drug became both the punishment and the cure. And so, in parlors across Britain, countless women sat by the fire, a glass of laudanum-laced cordial in hand, their lives slipping into a blur. Their children watched them fade. Their husbands grew impatient. Their doctors scribbled notes. And society whispered that they were unstable. Imagine now the sound of that whispering, soft, judgmental, carried through hallways and across tea tables. Words like mad, fragile, unfit. The labels cut deeper than the drug itself. For a woman already numbed by tinctures, the harshness of judgment was another poison. But still the bottles sold. Pharmacies thrived. Advertisements promised miracle cures. For sleeplessness, for nerves, for the feminine constitution. Laudanum will restore calm. Posters showed smiling women, elegant and composed, holding bottles as though they were treasures. The reality behind those smiles was darker, hidden from the public eye. Now let yourself wander in your mind through one of those advertisements. Picture the bold Victorian fonts, the elaborate borders, the shining bottle at the center. Hear the persuasive tone of the salesman. Gentle relief for the weary housewife. A trusted remedy for all ailments. And imagine the countless hands reaching for that remedy, unaware of the chain it would forge around them. Across drawing rooms and kitchens, across bedrooms and nurseries, the drug's shadow stretched. Babies quieted with opium syrups. Mothers dulled their nerves with tinctures. Grandmothers ended their days with morphine tonics. 3 generations, bound by the same chemical. Slow your breath now, as if you are walking quietly through that history. Each step is light, each moment softened by the passage of time. There were voices of warning even then. Some physicians began to write passionately about the dangers. Some reformers spoke out. But theirs were lonely voices, drowned by the louder hum of commerce and habit. For every doctor who warned, another prescribed. For every critic who shouted, 10 patients whispered for more. And so the cycle spun on. Imagine a river, wide and slow, its surface shining under a grey Victorian sky. That river is laudanum, steady, inevitable, carrying thousands upon thousands along its current. Some drift peacefully, some struggle, some vanish beneath the surface. Society stands on the banks, watching but not understanding. They see only the splashes, not the current. As the century wore on, the image of the laudanum-using woman became almost archetypal. Poets romanticized her as fragile, ethereal, lost in dreams. Painters depicted her reclining, pale and beautiful, lost in thought. The reality was far less graceful. Trembling hands, hollow eyes, unpredictable moods. Yet art, like society, often chose to see the surface, not the truth. Take another breath. Imagine such a painting now. The soft brushstrokes of a Victorian artist. A woman reclining, her dress flowing, her gaze far away. A bottle, small and discreet, painted into the background. To the viewer she appears angelic, dreamlike. But you, knowing the story, can see the weight behind the paint, the silent evidence of addiction hidden beneath elegance. And so, beauty and sorrow intertwined. Laudanum was both muse and monster, healer and destroyer. And through it all, the women of the era bore the burden. Now, as the story drifts deeper, let your body sink further into calm. The fire in the Victorian hearth burns lower. The fog outside grows thicker. The voices of the past grow fainter, like whispers dissolving into the night air. You are floating with them, listening, resting, drifting. Breathe in slowly. Feel your chest rise, then fall. Let the air be soft like a gentle mist. With every word, imagine yourself sinking deeper into comfort, deeper into stillness. The story is not rushing. It is gliding like a slow river under a grey Victorian sky. We have seen the women in parlours and kitchens, with bottles on their tables. We have walked through hospitals, through chemist shops, through quiet graveyards. Now let us wander into the minds of the poets, the thinkers, the artists of the age. For they too were touched by the amber liquid. In dimly lit rooms, with curtains drawn against the fog, writers dipped their pens in ink and in laudanum. The drug promised visions, creativity, a soft glow of inspiration. And so they wrote, sometimes in brilliance, sometimes in madness. Their words were praised, their visions admired. Yet behind those words was often the same struggle, the same chain that bound the women of the age. But here lies a difference. When men fell into the grip of laudanum, society often excused them. They were eccentric geniuses, tortured artists, brilliant minds lost in opium dreams. When women fell into the same grip, society condemned them. They were hysterics, maniacs, unstable creatures. The drug revealed not only suffering, but also the double standards of an entire era. Let your mind drift to that unfairness. Feel it like a cold wind through an open window. Men celebrated, women shamed. The same poison, two stories. Now, imagine a salon gathering in London. Gentle laughter, the clink of teacups, the hum of conversation. A famous male poet is praised for his visions, inspired by laudanum. His words are recited, admired. At the same gathering, a lady sits in the corner, pale, her hand trembling as she lifts her cup. Whispers follow her. She is unwell, unstable, poor creature. The poet's dreams are genius. The woman's dreams are madness. Such was the lens of the age. And so, countless women lived in shadows. Hidden, dismissed, judged. Their bottles were tucked into drawers, slipped quietly into handbags, taken in secret. And when their behavior changed, when their tempers frayed or their minds faltered, the blame was placed on them, never on the bottle. Let yourself imagine the sound of those hidden moments. A cork pulled gently from a bottle. The faint splash of liquid into a glass. A sigh of relief. Then silence. These sounds repeated in thousands of homes. Soft, secret, almost invisible. A rhythm of dependence, woven into daily life. Breathe slower now. Each sip of this history is like a drop of laudanum itself, dulling, soothing, blurring the edges. But here, in this gentle retelling, there is no judgment, no cruelty. Only calm, only softness, only the truth, whispered like a lullaby. The drug was not only chemical, it was cultural. It reflected the anxieties of a society in transition. Industrial cities growing louder, lives growing faster, roles for women tightening under pressure. In that tension, laudanum became a quiet escape, a way to endure, a way to survive. Imagine walking those foggy streets once more. Gas lamps glow faintly. Carriages rattle past. In the windows of tall houses, dim lights flicker. Behind some of those windows sit women with bottles in their hands. Some are young, some are old, some are rich, some are poor. All are connected by the same quiet dependence. The city itself feels drowsy, as though laudanum flows not only in veins, but in the very air. And yet, amid this haze, reformers continued to speak. By the late 19th century, voices grew stronger, calling for regulation, for recognition, for change. Newspapers began to print more serious warnings. Doctors began to acknowledge addiction as a condition, not merely a weakness. Slowly, society opened its eyes. But imagine how slow that opening was. Like dawn creeping over a foggy landscape, the light faint, hesitant, easily swallowed by mist. For every step forward there was resistance. Pharmacies still sold their bottles. Patients still asked for them. Doctors still prescribed. Change was not sudden. It was a slow, reluctant awakening. Let your breath follow that image of dawn. The first light, pale and uncertain. The fog still thick but thinning. Shadows still long but retreating. This is how reform came. Gradual, uneven, but inevitable. And so the century turned. The Victorian woman, once mocked as a maniac, was slowly reimagined as a victim of circumstance, of ignorance, of misplaced trust in medicine. Her story began to be told differently. Not as a tale of personal weakness, but as part of a larger history of medicine, of society, of gender. Take a deep breath now and release it slowly. You are not rushing. The story is not rushing. It flows like smoke from a lamp, curling, fading, soft. Each detail carries you deeper into calm. Each word is a step away from waking, a step closer to rest. And as the night grows heavier in this tale, so too does your body. Let your muscles loosen. Let your eyelids grow heavier. The story continues, but you are already drifting, floating, resting, carried by the whispers of the past. Let us drift, ever deeper, into this world of the past. Imagine the faint glow of a candle, flickering upon a wooden writing desk. The quill scratches softly upon parchment as some Victorian physician, weary but determined, writes his daily notes. His ink-stained fingers tremble slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the troubling mysteries he cannot solve. And as you listen, you may notice your own breath slowing, your mind unwinding, becoming calm, ready to absorb these tales as if they were whispers from history itself. We have already traced how laudanum and opiates shaped the lives of women across Britain, across Europe. But now, let us move further into the darker chambers of history, into the tales of women whose lives seemed to slip out of control. Some were once gentle, docile wives, mothers, or daughters, but under the spell of the drug, they transformed into what many newspapers called maniacs. And so, our journey continues. In the smoky drawing rooms of London, there were whispers. Whispered tales of respectable ladies who had begun to speak too loudly, to laugh too wildly, or to sob uncontrollably. A once polite dinner could suddenly dissolve into chaos as a woman, under the invisible grip of the drug, overturned her tea, or shouted at her husband, or wept with no end. These moments were shocking in an age where women were expected to remain restrained, delicate, and silent. Doctors began writing strange case notes. In Edinburgh, a physician described a patient, Mrs. R., who had once been a paragon of calm. She began her laudanum habit after difficult childbirth pains. Within a year, she grew dependent on larger doses. Her husband noticed changes, sudden bursts of anger, then long hours of eerie silence. She claimed she could hear voices in the walls at night. Soon she began pacing the house, speaking to herself, eyes wide and unblinking. In Victorian medical journals, she was labeled maniacal. Across the Channel in Paris, similar reports emerged. A countess, admired for her wit, began to take morphine to ease her migraines. At first, she glowed with energy, speaking endlessly at salons. Yet gradually, her brilliance turned erratic. Wild tangents, obsessive thoughts, laughter that bordered on hysteria. Her companions whispered, "Elle devenue folle, she has gone mad." The newspapers, hungry for scandal, sensationalized such cases. They described laudanum lunatics, as if the drug had unchained a wild beast hidden in respectable women. But beneath the headlines was human suffering, loneliness, secrecy, and despair. Many of these women were not monsters. They were victims of a society that prescribed drugs freely without understanding the consequences. And so, let us breathe, slowly, deeply, as we imagine the atmosphere of these homes. The sound of a grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The faint smell of coal smoke drifting through the curtains. A woman sitting by the fire, her hands trembling as she pours a tiny vial of dark laudanum into her teacup. She stares into the flames, her mind both comforted and unsettled. Outside, the winter wind rattles the panes, and somewhere far away, a horse's hooves echo on the cobblestones. Step by step, dose by dose, lives slipped away into confusion. A historian later remarked that Victorian England was not only an empire of progress, but also an empire under sedation. The drug that was meant to calm, to soothe, to quiet, had begun to create storms within. This is where our gentle exploration rests for now. Let your breath deepen as we pause. The story still unfolding, the shadows of history still whispering. Relax. Let the sound of these words drift through you, like a gentle breeze moving through tall grass at twilight. As we go deeper into this story, allow yourself to imagine the texture of the past, the velvet drapes, the smell of lamp oil, the heavy hush of Victorian evenings. You are safe here, only listening, only floating as the tale unfolds. The word mania was used so often in the 19th century. Physicians wrote it in their journals with grave seriousness. Mania induced by opium, they said, almost like a warning, almost like a riddle they could not solve. For them, women were supposed to be docile, obedient, calm. Any display of intensity was deemed unnatural. And when laudanum or morphine pulled open hidden doors in the mind, those doors revealed storms that society had no language for. One of the most haunting accounts comes from a small town in Yorkshire. A reverend wrote about his wife, whom he adored. She had suffered chronic pain in her joints, and the local apothecary recommended laudanum. First it was a blessing. Her pain lessened, she smiled again, and she could sing hymns at church. But over the years, the dose grew larger. She began to sing too loudly, her voice rising uncontrollably in the chapel until parishioners whispered in embarrassment. Then came the nights when she would roam the churchyard under the moon, speaking in tongues that no one understood. Her husband wrote in sorrow, "She has been overtaken by mania, and I know not if she shall ever return to me." In London, boarding houses sometimes hid such women from sight. Families who wished to protect their reputation would pay innkeepers to care for their troubled daughters. Behind locked doors, these women raved, laughed, or stared blankly at the ceiling for hours. One journalist who visited such a house wrote, "They are not criminals, nor are they witches, but the opium has unlocked within them an endless night." And still, the drug was everywhere. In the chemist's shop, in neatly labeled bottles, often sold beside soap and candles. It was not illegal, not forbidden. Children could buy it for their mothers. Housewives bought it to ease headaches, to calm nerves, to soothe the endless fatigue of long days. No one imagined that it could twist the mind into strange shapes. In the drawing rooms of Vienna, morphine became fashionable among wealthy women. They injected it discreetly, using fine syringes with mother-of-pearl handles. For some, it made the world glow brighter. But others slipped into spirals of mania. Obsessions with music, endless chatter, uncontrollable laughter. Doctors began writing case studies about these hysterical morphine women, describing them with both fascination and fear. Picture, if you will, the scene of one such woman in Vienna. She sits at a grand piano, her hands moving feverishly across the keys. At first, the music is beautiful, a sonata filling the candlelit room. But soon the notes grow wild, discordant, crashing together. Her family watches in horror as she plays on and on, her eyes blazing, her body trembling with unnatural energy. And then, suddenly, she collapses, the syringe falling from her pocket, the music ending in silence. The more stories spread, the more society whispered. Respectable women are becoming maniacs, they said. But the truth was quieter, sadder. These women were not monsters. They were victims of ignorance, of medical blindness, of a society that prescribed poisons with the same casualness as sugar. Take a deep breath now. Imagine the flicker of gaslight on old wallpaper, the sound of rain tapping against a window, the quiet sigh of a woman alone in her chamber. She pours the amber liquid into her cup, not knowing whether it will bring peace or madness. The story continues, slow and gentle, like the ticking of a clock in an endless night. Breathe deeply now. Let the past surround you gently, like mist curling across a quiet field at dawn. The tale you are hearing is not hurried, not rushed. It moves slowly, steadily, like the turning of old pages. Each detail, each whisper of history, drifts over you, calming your thoughts as you listen. In Victorian medical circles, there was a particular fascination with how women responded to opiates. Doctors recorded case after case, trying to classify what they saw. Some spoke of hysterical excitement, others of melancholic madness. The word maniac appeared again and again, yet few paused to ask whether the mania came from the drug, or from the loneliness and isolation of women's lives themselves. Consider the diaries that survive from that era. In them, women described their struggles in fragile handwriting. One woman, Sarah B., living in Bristol, wrote that laudanum was her constant companion. She began with a few drops to calm her nerves after her infant died. Soon she took it every evening, then every afternoon, then every morning. Her words shift over the months. At first sorrowful, then feverish, then disjointed and nearly incoherent. By the final entries, her handwriting slants across the page in a frantic scrawl. She writes about hearing voices in the wind, about seeing her child's face in the mirror. The drug had carried her far beyond grief, into a realm that her neighbors called mania. The Victorians were deeply unsettled by such transformations. For men, opium addiction was often excused as the burden of genius or the stress of work. But for women, any deviation from calm obedience was judged harshly. A woman who shouted, who wept uncontrollably, who laughed too loud, these were signs in society's eyes of a dangerous madness. And so, the drug became not only a chemical trap but also a social weapon. Women were locked away in asylums, their mania recorded in ledgers, their names forgotten. One asylum report from 1872 tells of a woman admitted for uncontrollable fits of laughter and raving speech. She was the daughter of a merchant, well-educated, refined. But laudanum had become her secret refuge. In the asylum, she alternated between singing hymns at the top of her lungs and whispering about spirits only she could see. The doctor's note simply read, "Opium mania. Prognosis uncertain." And yet, behind the cold words of these reports, one can almost hear the trembling voices of the women themselves. Perhaps they were crying for help, for understanding. Perhaps their so-called madness was a desperate attempt to escape the crushing silence of Victorian expectations. Imagine the soundscape of those asylums. The creak of iron beds, the echo of footsteps in long corridors, the murmur of prayers, the occasional piercing cry of a patient lost in visions. Outside, the world continued. Horse-drawn carriages clattering down cobblestone streets, factory chimneys pouring smoke into the sky, newspapers filled with progress and empire. But inside, hidden away, women suffered under the shadow of the drug. And still, society turned a blind eye. Laudanum remained on sale. Doctors continued to prescribe it liberally. Apothecaries profited quietly. And women continued to slip, silently, from calm to chaos. Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. A woman seated in her parlor, the curtains drawn, a tiny vial of dark liquid on the table beside her. She lifts it, tilts her head back, and lets the drops fall onto her tongue. The bitterness spreads. She waits, breath slowing, heart racing, unsure whether peace or mania will come tonight. And so, the story moves deeper. like a river winding into darker valleys, carrying with it all the whispers of forgotten lives. Let us drift further now, deeper into the shadows of Victorian nights. Imagine yourself walking softly through a quiet street in London. The lamps glow faintly, their gaslight flickering in the mist. The air is heavy with the scent of coal smoke and damp stone. Somewhere behind shuttered windows, women sit in silence with their bottles of laudanum, waiting for the storm or the calm it will bring. As you walk with me through these memories, your breath slows. Your body relaxes, and history feels like a dream. The newspapers of the 19th century were filled with sensational tales. One article from 1868 described a lady of high breeding, who shocked her neighbors by running barefoot into the street, screaming about demons that only she could see. The writer claimed she had been unhinged by opium. To the public, it was both terrifying and fascinating. Women were supposed to be gentle ornaments of the home, not wild figures of mania racing through the night. Yet laudanum and morphine unlocked behaviors that society could not explain. In Germany, a physician named Dr. Heinrich Müller documented several cases of women who developed what he called opium topsect, opium frenzy. One of his patients, a governess, had relied on the drug for sleeplessness. Over time, she became restless, talking endlessly to herself, pacing the floor for hours. She would break into sudden fits of laughter, then collapse into sobbing. Her employer dismissed her, calling her mad. In Müller's notes, one line stands out. The drug has stripped her of all her masks, and she is left only with her raw soul in torment. And in France, the fashionable circles of Paris spoke in whispers about women of society who lost control during soirees. One countess was said to have danced wildly on tables, shouting verses of poetry while her companions looked on in horror. Another noblewoman declared herself a prophetess, claiming visions of angels and demons, while under the obvious influence of morphine injections. Doctors, half fascinated and half scandalized, began to warn that opiates could ignite hidden passions in the female mind. But not all stories reached the public eye. Most of them were hidden in private diaries, in quiet hospital ledgers, in whispers among servants. For every headline about a woman who ran mad in the streets, there were dozens of others who suffered in silence behind lace curtains. The mania was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. A woman who spoke too fast at tea, who stayed awake for nights whispering to herself, who began to believe her furniture was watching her. Imagine such a room now. The wallpaper patterned with faded roses, the fire burning low, a woman seated in a rocking chair, her hands clutching a shawl. She stares at the shadows on the wall, convinced they are moving. She mutters softly, her words tumbling out like broken fragments of thought. Her family watches, unsure whether to call a doctor or a priest or no one at all. Outside, the snow falls silently, covering the street in white, muffling the world in quiet. The Victorian world was orderly on the surface. Manners, etiquette, appearances. But beneath that order, chaos lurked, waiting for the touch of a drug to release it. And women, already constrained by endless rules, became the most visible casualties of this chemical storm. As you hear these stories, let your own breath fall into rhythm, slow and steady. Feel the weight of history as if it were a blanket, heavy but soft, wrapping you gently. The tale goes on, unbroken, like the ticking of a clock that has never stopped since those days. Take a deep, slow breath. Feel your body sink into stillness. And let us step once more into the candlelit world of the past. The room is hushed, the fire glows faintly, and the only sound is the whisper of memory. We are drifting further into the lives of women whose fate was tangled with a dark liquid, a bitter drop of comfort that became a storm. By the mid-19th century, physicians across Britain had begun to notice a peculiar pattern. The cases of female mania, linked to laudanum, were rising. Some doctors tried to describe it in medical terms: hallucinations, delirium, hysteria. But the newspapers preferred drama. They called it madness born of the bottle, the lady's ruin, or even the devil's tincture. In one widely circulated story from 1875, a vicar's wife in Bath shocked her congregation. She had long been known for her gentle smile, her quiet devotion. But one Sunday morning during service, she suddenly rose from her pew, shrieking that angels were descending through the roof. Her cries echoed in the church, the organ fell silent, and parishioners fled in panic. Later, her husband confessed she had been fond of laudanum for years, prescribed for her fragile nerves. The tale spread quickly, whispered in markets and drawing rooms, another cautionary ghost story of the age. In Scotland, doctors wrote of farm women who relied on the drug during harsh winters. One woman, living in the Highlands, began taking laudanum after a miscarriage. Her neighbors noted strange changes. She would sit by the fire for hours, her eyes unblinking, whispering to the shadows. Then, without warning, she would erupt in furious laughter or chase her children from the cottage with wild, frantic gestures. The village called her bewitched, but the local doctor noted simply, "Opium mania, advanced stage." Crossing to America, the story was much the same. In New England towns, women purchased opiates in small bottles labeled soothing syrup or poppy tincture. At first, these were used to calm restless children, to ease menstrual pain, to soothe headaches. But in time, some women found themselves caught in spells of restlessness, paranoia, and frenzy. American newspapers, always fond of sensation, printed lurid accounts. Mothers turned mad by the bottle. Wives carried to asylums. Though the oceans separated them, the drug's effects did not respect borders. And yet, there was always silence too. For every woman who burst into public mania, there were countless others who simply unraveled quietly at home. Their mania was hidden. Rapid thoughts, trembling hands, endless weeping, secret visions. Families often concealed them, for shame was heavier than compassion in those days. Imagine such a household now. A tall townhouse in London, curtains drawn against the street. Inside, a mother rocks back and forth, clutching a vial close to her chest. She mutters of unseen figures, of whispers only she can hear. Her children huddle in another room, listening with frightened hearts. The father paces, torn between calling a doctor and protecting the family's reputation. Outside, the street is bustling with carriages, the world oblivious to the quiet storm inside. The mania was more than madness. It was isolation, secrecy, silence. Women became shadows in their own homes, haunted by visions no one else could see, trapped by drops of opium that had once promised peace. Let your breath deepen again, calm and steady, as if you too are watching from a quiet corner of that house, the ticking of the clock marking each moment of descent. The story is not finished. It flows onward like a dark river through the centuries. Slow your breath. Feel the gentle rhythm of your chest rising and falling, and allow yourself to sink deeper into this story. The world of the Victorians unfolds before you, rich with shadows and flickering light, each corner holding a secret. You are safe, only listening, only wandering softly through the corridors of memory. By the 1880s, asylums across Britain and Europe had begun recording higher numbers of women admitted for what was labeled opium mania. Some admissions were temporary, an effort to dry out a patient, to force her body to endure withdrawal. Others were permanent. Families, overwhelmed or embarrassed, simply left their daughters, wives, or mothers in the care of institutions and seldom returned. One asylum physician, Dr. Thomas Clouston of Edinburgh, described women who, under the grip of laudanum, swung between extremes of euphoria and despair. A lady might burst into laughter at midnight, clapping her hands with delight, only to sink into uncontrollable sobbing an hour later. Some became convinced that grand conspiracies surrounded them, imagining neighbors plotting through the walls, or demons whispering from the shadows. For the Victorians, who prized order and restraint, this unpredictability was terrifying. In the coastal town of Brighton, a case became notorious. A wealthy woman, once admired for her elegance, began pacing the seafront at night, calling out to strangers, claiming she could control the tides with her thoughts. Children followed her, laughing, while adults turned away in discomfort. The newspapers called her the maniac widow. Only later did it emerge that she had been consuming laudanum daily for nearly 2 decades. And still, the drug's use did not diminish. Doctors themselves often relied upon it, and some quietly sympathized with their patients, for they too knew the sweetness of its relief and the bitterness of its curse. A few physicians admitted in their notes that the very medicine they prescribed had created the mania they were now treating. Yet the cycle continued. In Ireland, another tragic tale unfolded. A mother of 6, worn by years of poverty and childbirth, began to take opium tincture for her nerves. At first it gave her energy to work. But soon she became restless, irritable, and violent. Her children feared her sudden outbursts. Neighbors whispered of madness. One winter night, she wandered barefoot into the fields, speaking to the stars, until she collapsed from cold. When she was carried home, the local doctor wrote simply, "Opium mania, beyond saving." Even among the wealthy, where appearances mattered most, mania could not always be hidden. At grand dinners, some women would suddenly grow wild-eyed, talking too much, laughing at nothing, shaking with strange energy. Servants whispered in kitchens. Gossip spread in drawing rooms. And in those whispers a phrase began to repeat. "The drug has taken her." Picture this scene now. A candlelit ballroom, violins playing softly, chandeliers glowing. Ladies in silks and jewels glide across the floor. Yet in one corner a woman stands apart. Her eyes are too bright, her smile too wide. She clutches a fan tightly, then suddenly lets it fall, laughing with a sharpness that startles those around her. Her husband takes her arm quickly, guiding her away, as whispers rise behind them. To some she is mad. To others, she is simply another victim of the laudanum bottle hidden in her purse. As you listen, let the image settle into your mind. The shimmering elegance of the age, and beneath it, the trembling hands, the racing hearts, the storm of mania hidden behind polite smiles. Breathe slowly now, in and out. The story continues, flowing like a soft river, carrying us deeper into the forgotten chambers of history. Let your eyes grow heavy as you listen. Feel the weight of history resting softly upon you, like a warm blanket. The flickering glow of Victorian lamps surrounds us once more, and in the shadows, the women who lived and suffered under the spell of opium drift quietly into view. By the late 19th century, the term female mania became a label that hovered uneasily over many cases in asylum reports. Doctors often described it with detached precision: wild laughter, incoherent speech, sudden violence, unending weeping. But behind those words were real women, mothers, daughters, sisters, who had slipped into a strange twilight world shaped by laudanum. One report from Manchester in 1883 described a young woman who believed she was pursued by invisible animals. She screamed at night, clawing at the walls, trying to drive them away. Her family, ashamed, locked her in her room until finally, the police carried her to an asylum. In her records, the only explanation given was excessive use of opium tincture. Mania. There were softer stories too. Quieter manias, less visible to the world. A widow in Liverpool, living alone, wrote in her letters about how laudanum made her feel as though she could hear music when none was playing. She described melodies in the air, choirs in the silence. At first it comforted her. But later, the music became overwhelming, filling her head, drowning her thoughts. Neighbors spoke of her humming to herself at all hours, her eyes distant, her hands trembling. To them she was peculiar. To herself, she was trapped in a world she could not escape. In rural villages, gossip spread quickly. Women who acted strangely were whispered about as witches, cursed, or touched by spirits. In truth, their mania was the product of a bottle bought easily from the local apothecary. Yet superstition mingled with science, and families often called priests as readily as doctors. Exorcisms, prayers, and rituals sometimes stood side by side with doses of medicine and confinement. Across the Atlantic, in America, the stories echoed. In New York, a physician described the case of a wealthy young woman who began to believe she was destined to marry an angel. She dressed in white gowns, spoke endlessly of divine voices, and sang hymns through the night. Her family sent her to a private sanatorium, where doctors blamed her mania on morphine injections. "The angel she loves," one wrote coldly, "is only the drug." Imagine the soundscape of such lives. A woman's footsteps pacing endlessly on wooden floors. The creak of her chair as she rocks back and forth. The sudden burst of laughter that startles her children. The long silences, broken only by whispers no one else can hear. All of this, wrapped in the hushed world of Victorian homes where appearances were everything, and secrets were buried deep. And always the bottles remained. Tiny glass vials with handwritten labels. Brown liquids that promised sleep, calm, or relief. They sat quietly on bedside tables, in purses, in kitchen cupboards. They were as common as tea, as trusted as bread. No one thought twice until it was too late. Close your eyes and picture one now. The lamplight shining faintly through the amber glass. Cork stopper worn by use. The liquid inside, waiting, silent, holding both comfort and chaos in equal measure. A woman's hand reaches for it, hesitant, trembling, and the cycle begins again. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the ticking of an old clock. Slow, steady, patient. The night of history is long, and we are still walking through its corridors. Settle deeper now. Feel the calm in your body, and imagine the quiet hush of a Victorian night. The fire burns low, the curtains are drawn, and the outside world fades away. Only the sound of the past remains, whispering to us like soft wind through autumn leaves. By the late 1800s, the word maniac was used almost too freely. Doctors, clergymen, and journalists all leaned on it to explain behaviors they did not understand. Yet when we peer closely at these stories, we see not monsters, but fragile lives unraveling under the weight of opium. Take, for instance, the tale of Lady Eleanor W., recorded in London society circles. Once known for her refined wit, she began to use laudanum after the birth of her third child. At first, her friends noticed nothing unusual, perhaps a touch more energy, a brighter sparkle in her eyes. But in time she became unpredictable. At dinners, she would laugh uncontrollably at the smallest remark. At concerts, she would cry through entire performances. Eventually, she declared herself the reincarnation of a medieval queen and demanded her servants bow before her. Her family, desperate to shield their reputation, confined her quietly at their country estate. In rural Wales, another woman's decline was quieter, sadder. A schoolteacher named Mary began taking the drug to ease her migraines. For months it helped her work. But slowly, her lessons became confused. She would repeat the same sentence again and again, staring at her students with wide, unfocused eyes. Parents grew alarmed when children reported that she spoke to empty corners of the room as if spirits stood there. Eventually she was dismissed. Her neighbors whispered that she had gone maniac. Across Europe, similar accounts emerged. In Austria, a baroness wandered her estate at night, singing loudly to the stars. In Italy, a merchant's wife claimed she could speak with saints after each dose, falling into trances that frightened her household. In each case, mania became the word, yet behind it was a drug prescribed casually, trusted too easily. Imagine one of these homes now. The wallpaper patterned with flowers, the furniture polished, the lamps glowing softly. A woman sits in her chair, her face pale, her hands twitching. She mutters a stream of words, half prayers, half nonsense. Her family watches silently, torn between fear and pity. Outside, the village carries on as if nothing has changed. The church bell rings, horses pass by, children laugh in the street. But inside, the world is slipping into chaos. And still the bottles kept appearing. On dressing tables, on nightstands, in medicine cabinets. They were sold by trusted chemists, recommended by respected doctors. The very fabric of Victorian life was stitched with opium threads. And for women, bound already by endless rules of conduct, the drug became both an escape and a prison. Take a slow breath now. Hear the faint ticking of the clock, the crackle of the fire, the distant echo of carriage wheels outside. These sounds belong to that world, the world where women turned from calm to frenzy, not by choice, but by the invisible chains of a bitter liquid. The story continues, unbroken, as if each whisper of history is another step along a darkened hallway, leading us deeper, ever deeper. Drift a little further now. Imagine yourself walking through a candlelit corridor, the scent of wax and dust in the air, soft fabric brushing along wooden walls. Each step takes you deeper into the shadowy heart of the 19th century. The silence hums gently, broken only by the echoes of forgotten lives. In the medical reports of the era, certain words reappear again and again. Excitement, frenzy, delirium, mania. Doctors recorded these observations with clinical precision, yet often, between the lines, one can sense their bewilderment. How could such a respected tonic transform wives, mothers, and daughters into figures of uncontrollable passion or despair? There was Mrs. A tailor's wife in Manchester. She began taking laudanum for insomnia. At first she slept peacefully. Then she began wandering the streets at night, singing hymns and shouting prophecies. Neighbors recalled her eyes, wide, glassy, filled with strange fire. When they tried to calm her, she would hiss, laugh, or burst into tears. Eventually, the local magistrate ordered her confined. Yet her husband, broken-hearted, whispered that the bottle was the true jailer. In Scotland, the case of Margaret H. was recorded in asylum notes. She believed she could hear voices in the walls. She claimed angels instructed her to dance through the night, spinning until she collapsed. When the physicians examined her, they noted the strong scent of laudanum in her breath. They described her as deranged by habitual indulgence. And in genteel drawing rooms across London, quieter forms of mania appeared. Some women became restless, pacing endlessly, rearranging objects, speaking in rapid bursts. Others sank into obsessions, writing letters that filled entire notebooks, repeating the same sentences hundreds of times. The families hid these letters in drawers, embarrassed by the strange scrawls of once dignified women. Picture it now. A small writing desk, the surface littered with scraps of paper. A woman bends over the page, her hand trembling, her lips moving silently. She writes the same phrase. I am not asleep, I am awake, I am not asleep. Again and again, ink staining her fingers. Outside, the household moves carefully, as if around a fragile, dangerous flame. The whispers spread from one home to another. People began to fear that mania was contagious, not by touch, but by sight. To witness someone unravel, they thought, was to risk unraveling yourself. But the truth was simpler and darker. The same bottle sat in almost every cabinet. What happened in one household could, with ease, happen in another. Doctors, however, often chose silence. Admitting the dangers of laudanum meant admitting their own role in prescribing it. And so, the cycle continued. Women turned frantic, families suffered, reputations collapsed. But the bottles never stopped appearing. Take another slow breath. Feel the stillness wrapping around you like a velvet cloak. Imagine the crackle of the hearth, the gentle sway of curtains in the night breeze. With every sound, history breathes beside you. These women, these so-called maniacs, were not strangers, but echoes of a world caught between medicine and madness. And as the hours of that century slipped by, so too did countless minds, fading softly into the abyss. Let your body sink deeper into the cushions, your breath slow and steady, as we continue drifting through the dim corridors of Victorian memory. Imagine a hushed drawing room, velvet curtains drawn, the tick of a grandfather clock filling the silence. Somewhere behind closed doors, the soft clink of a glass bottle touches the air. The mania took many forms, some loud and explosive, others quiet and hidden. Doctors of the time used words like hysteria, nervous excitability, or female frenzy. Today, we recognize that much of what they observed was the unraveling of minds under the influence of opiates. But in the candlelight of that era, it appeared as something unearthly, almost supernatural. There is a story of Lady Caroline F., a woman of high birth who resided in Bath. She had once been known for her wit and elegance. But under laudanum's spell, her laughter grew wild, ringing late into the night. Servants whispered that she danced in her chambers until dawn, her hair loose, her gown torn. At the breakfast table, she spoke of hearing choirs in the chimney, of angels whispering through the flames. Her husband, ashamed, sent her quietly to the countryside, where she remained until her death. Across the channel, similar tales unfolded in Parisian salons. Laudanum and morphine were not confined to Britain. French physicians too recommended these potions, and French women too descended into states of madness. In one asylum near Lyon, a report describes a woman who believed she had swallowed stars. She sat for hours with her mouth open, insisting that light poured from her throat. Back in London, newspapers sometimes reported curious cases, though always with caution. Respectable families demanded discretion, but gossip traveled faster than print. Neighbors peered into gardens, wondering if the lady of the house was ill, or if she too had fallen prey to the hidden epidemic. Some cases were tinged with violence. A certain Mrs. G., once a mild governess, began lashing out at her children, chasing them with kitchen knives. When she was restrained, she howled like an animal, her body convulsing. Neighbors later testified they had seen her sipping from a small vial before her outbursts. Others became prey to obsessions of purity. There were women who bathed repeatedly, scrubbing their skin raw, convinced that filth clung invisibly to their bodies. The medical men labeled it mania of cleanliness. Yet when they examined the medicine cabinets, the truth glimmered quietly in brown glass bottles. Imagine it. Whole households caught in uneasy silence, watching their wives, daughters, mothers slip into strange patterns of thought. A piano might play through the night. One note struck again and again, until the sound became unbearable. A woman might refuse food, claiming that shadows in the bread would poison her. Another might lock herself in her chamber, chanting, praying, whispering. And all the while, the bottle sat near at hand, sometimes hidden beneath a pillow, sometimes openly displayed upon the mantelpiece. A comfort, a curse, a companion that never released its hold. As you drift with this history, picture yourself in one of those rooms. A fire burns low, shadows creep across patterned wallpaper. The scent of opium floats faintly in the air. Outside, the world continues in orderly fashion. Inside, a mind unravels quietly, piece by piece. This was the Victorian paradox. Elegance on the surface, madness beneath. A society of rules and refinement, yet one fueled by a drug that loosened every boundary, dissolved every restraint. And so, the stories multiplied, whispered from mouth to ear, etched into asylum registers, hidden in family diaries. The women who lived them were branded as maniacs, yet their madness was less their own than the poisons that flowed in their veins. Close your eyes if you wish. Imagine yourself stepping into a Victorian parlor where the air is heavy with perfume, candle smoke, and something darker. The faint, sweet, narcotic trace of laudanum. The lamps flicker. The piano stands silent. And somewhere nearby, a woman is laughing softly to herself. The kind of laugh that unsettles rather than comforts. These accounts were not confined to the wealthy. In poorer districts, mania took on a different character. Women of the working class, who had taken the drug to dull the pain of childbirth or to silence hunger, sometimes became restless wanderers. Police reports tell of mothers found wandering barefoot through alleys at midnight, murmuring incoherently, clutching empty bottles in their hands. In one London case, a woman known as Sarah J. was arrested after she attempted to climb the iron gates of a church at dawn. She screamed that she was being pursued by invisible men, her hair wild, her eyes filled with terror. At the station, officers discovered she had been dosing herself with laudanum to keep exhaustion at bay while she worked endless hours in a textile mill. The middle-class households had their own secrets. A diary entry from 1864 describes "Dear Cousin Mary," who would sit for hours before the mirror, convinced her reflection was mocking her. She grew obsessed with covering the mirrors, draping them in cloth. When the cloths were removed, she shrieked and fainted. The family physician, after examining her, simply noted, "A state of mania induced by excess of tincture." And then there were the tragic deaths, though families rarely admitted them. Women who had been found convulsing, foaming at the mouth, eyes rolling back. Doctors quietly wrote overdose. But among the community, whispers spread that the poor souls had gone mad before death claimed them. Picture it now. Narrow gas-lit streets, fog settling thickly against the windows. Coach rattles past. Inside a cramped home, a woman rocks back and forth, murmuring about visions in the corner. The household is silent, frightened, yet resigned. For everyone knows the little bottle is at the root, but no one dares throw it away. Mania was not always violent or terrifying. Sometimes it came cloaked in gaiety. Women who had once been reserved grew suddenly bold, singing loudly, speaking scandalous truths, even attempting to run away with strangers. To some husbands, this seemed a greater horror than weeping or silence. A wife who laughed too much, who defied decorum, was considered as mad as one who tore her clothes or shrieked at shadows. The Victorian doctors gave such cases different names: moral insanity, excessive gaiety, nervous mania. But behind each term lay the same truth. A woman's brain, flooded with opium, was spinning wildly out of control. Now breathe in deeply. Hear the crackling of a distant fire, the quiet tick of a mantel clock. Each sound reminds you that you are safe in the present, even as we wander through the troubled past. Imagine yourself walking through an asylum corridor. The walls echo with whispers and laughter. Behind iron bars, women sit, pace, or weep. Some smile dreamily, their minds far away. Others claw at the air, insisting invisible creatures torment them. Many of them arrived here not as lunatics, but as patients of doctors who had prescribed one dose too many. It was a silent epidemic, a madness born not of nature, but of medicine itself. Let yourself sink even deeper, as though lying beneath heavy quilts in a Victorian bedchamber. The shutters are drawn, a faint breeze creeps through the cracks, and somewhere down the hall a clock chimes softly. We are still in that strange world, half elegant, half shadowed, where a single drop from a bottle could transform a gentlewoman into something her family barely recognized. One of the haunting aspects of this mania was its unpredictability. Sometimes the madness came swiftly like a storm, and then disappeared within hours, leaving the sufferer exhausted but calm. At other times it lingered day after day, until it seemed as though the woman's true personality had dissolved entirely. There is the case of Eleanor M., recorded in a physician's notebook from Liverpool. At first, she took laudanum for a toothache. Her pain eased, but soon she began complaining of visions of insects crawling across her skin. In one episode, she stripped off her clothing and attempted to wash herself with vinegar, insisting she was infested. Neighbors restrained her, and by the next morning she sat quietly by the fire, seemingly sane again. Her husband, weary and confused, noted that these episodes repeated whenever the bottle grew too near. In another account from Ireland, a young wife was said to have spent entire nights rearranging chairs in her parlor. Over and over she moved them, convinced that spirits required order. When her family tried to intervene, she screamed with such violence that they feared she might harm herself. Physicians later described her condition as paroxysms of mania, yet the notes carefully avoided the word laudanum, though her family admitted she consumed it daily. Imagine these households. The flicker of candlelight across wallpaper, shadows stretching long across the floor, a woman pacing endlessly, her slippers brushing against the carpet, a husband sitting with his head in his hands, unsure whether to call a doctor or a priest, children watching from staircases, frightened, whispering among themselves. The drug seemed to unlock doors in the mind that were better left closed. Some women spoke of secret voices, angels, demons, or the dead. They wrote letters to long-lost relatives, convinced they could bridge the gap between life and death. Others declared themselves prophets, speaking in tongues, predicting floods or fires. To onlookers, it was both terrifying and mesmerizing, as if the ordinary had suddenly become otherworldly. And yet, there was a strange tenderness too. Families often hesitated to confine their loved ones to asylums. The stigma of madness was severe, and so many of these stories remained behind closed doors. Instead, relatives tiptoed around them, offering comfort, tolerating strange behaviors, hiding their shame from neighbors. Picture the quiet tragedy of a dining table where one seat sits empty, because the lady of the house cannot join without bursting into manic laughter or frantic weeping. The servants whisper, the children ask questions, and the master of the house offers vague answers. The bottle remains locked away in a drawer, but it is never truly absent. This silence, this secrecy, was part of why the problem persisted. The drug was too useful, too familiar, too woven into the fabric of life to abandon. And so, women slipped into states of mania again and again, while society tried to pretend nothing was amiss. Breathe slowly now, hearing the echo of their footsteps, their voices, their restless nights. We walk beside them, not to judge, but to understand the hidden cost of comfort in an age that valued appearances above all else. Settle yourself once more, as though reclining in an armchair by a glowing fire. The flames crackle gently, casting orange light on the walls, and the world outside feels very far away. We step deeper into this shadowed history, where bottles of laudanum sat innocently upon mantelpieces, yet carried within them storms of the mind. By the mid-19th century, doctors had begun documenting these strange outbursts more carefully. Medical journals of the era contained scattered notes, fragments of stories, written in stiff language but hiding lives of anguish. One physician in Bristol described a patient who alternated between states of angelic sweetness and furious outbursts of rage. Another in Edinburgh recounted a woman who believed she was royalty, demanding that servants kneel before her, though she lived in a modest cottage. The pattern was always similar: a dose of the drug, followed by strange exhilaration, and then sometimes a plunge into despair. The physicians called it cyclical mania. Families called it the curse of the bottle. Imagine a household on such a night. Dinner is served, the children are hushed, and the air feels tense. At first, the lady of the house smiles too brightly, her laughter a little too loud. Soon, she begins speaking rapidly, her hands fluttering in wild gestures. She insists she hears music no one else can hear. The family grows uneasy. Hours later, she collapses in sobs, shaking uncontrollably, her body drained. And in the morning, she remembers little, asking calmly for tea as though nothing had happened. Some women became violent toward themselves. A report from 1869 describes a young wife who attempted to leap from a second-story window during a fit of mania. When restrained, she scratched her own arms until they bled. Her family confessed she had consumed copious draughts of the tincture the night before. Others turned their fury outward. Police records note cases of women hurling crockery, smashing mirrors, or attacking their husbands in sudden bursts of rage. Respectable families often bribed officials to keep such matters quiet, for the shame of a woman's madness was thought worse than the crime itself. Picture the quiet dread of those nights. Children lying awake, clutching blankets, hearing their mother's footsteps pacing the floor above. A husband standing helplessly by the fire, staring into the flames, listening to muffled cries from the chamber. And somewhere, always, the bottle glimmers faintly in the lamplight, a small vessel holding both comfort and catastrophe. The drug blurred the line between dream and waking. Many women spoke of visions that came upon them in the night. Shimmering gardens, ghostly figures, voices calling their names. For some, these visions were blissful, filling them with strange joy. For others, they were terrifying, hurling them into shrieks of panic. In both cases, the family could only watch, powerless. And yet, society continued to trust the bottle. Newspapers advertised it. Doctors defended it. Shopkeepers sold it freely. Behind closed doors, women slipped into mania again and again, while the world outside admired the neatness of Victorian life. Take another deep breath. Hear the gentle tick of a clock, the sigh of wind against the window. Each sound draws you deeper into calm, even as we wander further into the stormy past. Let your body grow heavier, your breath softer, as we continue our slow walk through the hushed corridors of the 19th century. The lamps burn low, the night outside is deep and still, and inside the houses of Victorian Britain, secrets lie hidden in small glass bottles. The mania did not always appear at once. For many women, it crept gradually, like ivy spreading over stone. At first, there were small changes. Sleeplessness, restless energy, a tendency to talk too quickly. Families often mistook these shifts for signs of a lively spirit or nervousness. Only later did the symptoms grow stronger, more unsettling, until the truth could no longer be ignored. One account describes Mrs. R., a vicar's wife in Kent. She began taking laudanum for migraines. Within weeks, she spent her nights writing letters to strangers, convinced she had urgent messages from God. Her handwriting grew large and erratic, her words filled with urgency. Neighbors whispered of her fits of prophecy, yet her husband, bound by love and shame, kept her hidden away, insisting only that she was unwell. In Yorkshire, a young seamstress named Annie was known for humming softly as she worked. After months of laudanum use, her humming grew into uncontrollable singing, her voice rising louder and louder until customers complained. Eventually, she sang so wildly that her employer dismissed her. Deprived of work, she roamed the streets, laughing and singing at passers-by. Witnesses described her eyes as bright with mania. Imagine the sound of those voices, half joyful, half sorrowful, filling narrow cobblestone streets, echoing in alleyways. First, people might smile at the strange songs. But as the days passed, the songs grew frantic, unsettling, until people crossed the road to avoid her. In London, physicians began noticing another pattern: hallucinations of grandeur. Some women claimed they were queens, others swore they were angels. A case in 1873 describes a mother of 3 who suddenly demanded that her family build her a throne in the parlor. When they refused, she smashed the china cabinet and declared she would rule from ashes if not from velvet. Others saw demons where none existed. They screamed at corners of rooms, clutched their children protectively, or begged to be exorcised. The doctors called it delirium tremens when men suffered it from drink, but when women experienced the same visions from opium, they were labeled hysterical or mad. Picture a quiet chamber lit only by the glow of a single candle. A woman kneels by her bed, trembling, insisting she sees figures in the shadows. Her family gathers at the doorway, uncertain whether to pray, comfort, or call a doctor. The candle sputters, the shadows shift, and in her eyes the terror of mania burns brightly. These episodes carved deep scars in families. Children grew fearful of their mothers. Husbands avoided their wives. Sisters and cousins whispered nervously. Yet the cycle rarely ended. Physicians often prescribed more laudanum to calm the nerves, unknowingly deepening the very madness they sought to soothe. Take a breath now, slowly. Feel the warmth of the fire, the softness of the chair, the safety of this moment. We wander through a world long past, learning its hidden truths, but here in the present, you are safe, calm, and still. Breathe slowly, deeply. As though you are drifting through a fog-laden street in old London. The lamps glow dimly, horses clatter faintly in the distance, and behind shuttered windows, a quiet struggle unfolds. Not every case of mania ended in wild laughter or violent outbursts. Some women slipped instead into endless agitation, a nervous energy that never ceased. They paced hallways for hours, wringing their hands, muttering under their breath. Servants described them as haunted. Husbands said they were impossible to soothe. Doctors called it unquiet mania. One physician's notes from 1871 describe a lady of middle age who wandered her garden night after night, speaking to the flowers as though they were confidants. She grew convinced the roses could hear her secrets, and that the lilies whispered answers back. When neighbors questioned her behavior, her family explained gently that she was unwell of the nerves. But in her chambers, half-empty bottles lay scattered in drawers, faint traces of laudanum staining the glass. In another case from Birmingham, a schoolteacher named Harriet began hearing phantom bells. At first, she believed the church nearby had changed its schedule. Soon, however, she complained that the bells rang inside her head, unceasing, clanging from dawn till dusk. The noise drove her into frenzied states. She tore at her hair, screamed in class, and finally collapsed in exhaustion. Doctors attempted to bleed her, a common treatment of the day. Yet the bells returned. Only later did her family confess she had long been dosing herself with opiates to fight insomnia. Imagine the weight of those hours. The endless pacing, the restless murmurs, the phantom sounds echoing in the brain. A house filled with whispers and footsteps. A place where silence itself had been banished. Some families attempted cures of their own. Cold baths, herbal teas, religious prayer. A few locked the bottles away, hoping withdrawal would bring sanity back. But the absence of the drug brought new torments. Trembling, sweating, violent convulsions. Women screamed for relief, begged for the draught that had once soothed them. Many husbands, unable to bear the suffering, relented, and the cycle began anew. In polite society, these struggles were carefully concealed. If a guest arrived, the afflicted woman might be locked in her room, her cries muffled by heavy drapes. The parlor would be kept bright and cheerful, tea poured as though nothing unusual stirred in the upper floors. Respectability demanded silence, and so the truth of mania remained hidden behind lace curtains and polite smiles. Picture it clearly. The faint thump of footsteps overhead, the occasional cry piercing through, quickly covered by the sound of conversation and clinking teacups. Guests glance upward, uneasy, but say nothing. Outside, the carriages roll past, the world oblivious to the madness within. This was the cruel paradox of the Victorian age. An obsession with order and propriety, while chaos brewed in private chambers, born not of sin or weakness, but of a simple liquid medicine sold in every apothecary. And so, generation after generation, women fell into strange deliriums, and families endured them in silence. The drug was too familiar to be feared, too profitable to be banned, too convenient to be abandoned. Now take another deep breath. Hear the quiet crackle of an imagined fire, the distant sigh of wind. Let the calm of this present moment remind you that we are safe as we gaze back into their world. When restrictions on narcotics finally began to tighten in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the world started to confront the hidden epidemic. In Britain, the Pharmacy Act of 1868 was the first attempt to regulate dangerous substances, though it was still lenient enough that many women could obtain morphine or cocaine with little effort. It wasn't until the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1920 that these substances became truly controlled. For Victorian women, however, the damage had already been done. Countless diaries, medical journals, and even private letters from the era reveal how dependence on these drugs had reshaped female identity. Women who were once perceived as the epitome of gentleness and domestic grace had, under the influence of morphine or cocaine, transformed into erratic, unpredictable figures, sometimes violent, sometimes delirious, often broken in mind and body. Doctors of the era recorded shocking cases: wives attacking servants in a frenzy, mothers neglecting their infants while lost in a narcotic haze, and otherwise respectable society ladies begging pharmacists for more drops to calm their nerves. What had begun as a medical solution to feminine weakness ended up creating a generation of hidden addicts. This dark chapter exposed not just the dangers of unregulated medicine, but also the way Victorian society misunderstood women's health. The drugs did not cure hysteria. They only masked pain while creating a far more destructive demon inside the very women they were supposed to save. As the 20th century unfolded, the image of the drugged Victorian woman began to haunt medical debates, literature, and even public policy. The stories were not just about personal tragedy. They became symbols of how unchecked science and blind trust in authority could harm entire generations. Social reformers in Britain, and later in the United States, pointed to the epidemic of female addiction as proof that women's health had long been mishandled. The so-called cures for hysteria had created a deeper social illness: women who were stigmatized as unstable, incapable of reason, or morally weak, when in fact, their condition was the direct result of medical malpractice and pharmaceutical negligence. In drawing rooms and private clubs, men would whisper stories of once elegant ladies who had descended into madness. Writers like Charles Dickens and Wilkie Collins hinted at such figures in their novels: shadowy women with nervous hands, erratic moods, and an air of dangerous fragility. Though fiction softened the truth, the inspiration was often very real. Upper-class women whose dependency on morphine or laudanum had made them unpredictable and sometimes terrifying. And yet, even as regulations grew stricter, the stigma remained with women rather than the medical system. The label of hysteria clung to them, while doctors continued their careers with little blame. Only later, in feminist medical histories of the 20th century, would scholars begin to expose how Victorian women had been sacrificed in the name of progress and convenience. Softly, we can imagine the drawing rooms fading into candlelight, the rustle of heavy silk dresses echoing in memory, and behind it all the faint rattle of a medicine bottle, half empty, yet endlessly refilled. By the closing years of the Victorian era, the once hidden epidemic of drug use among women had left an undeniable mark on society. Families whispered about aunts or mothers who had taken ill, but never recovered. Servants carried secret knowledge of their mistresses' private struggles, carefully disposing of empty bottles of laudanum or hiding the trembling fits that overtook them in the evenings. The press, too, began to pick up on the phenomenon. Quietly at first, with subtle hints in serialized stories, then later in bolder headlines, newspapers reported on women who had succumbed to morphine or cocaine dependency. These accounts were often framed as cautionary tales, not just about drugs, but about the dangers of women stepping outside their natural roles. In the public imagination, the drugged woman was not only a victim of medicine, she was a symbol of chaos in a society that demanded order. Doctors debated endlessly. Some blamed the nervous disposition of women, insisting that their delicate nature made them vulnerable to overuse of medicine. Others, more progressive for their time, saw the problem for what it was: an industry of overprescription, a reckless reliance on quick remedies, and a refusal to treat women as rational patients capable of understanding their own health. As the world shifted into the Edwardian era, new voices began to emerge. Reformers argued for better education for women, for access to healthier treatments, and for acknowledgement that the Victorian medical model had failed. The haunting legacy of the drugged Victorian woman became a warning for the future, a reminder that progress without care, and science without empathy, could turn healing into harm. And so, the story lingers like a soft echo. Footsteps across a wooden floor, the faint scent of opium smoke clinging to heavy curtains, and the memory of countless women who were silenced not by madness, but by medicine. Imagine for a moment the last years of the 19th century. London shrouded in mist, cobblestone streets glistening with lamplight, and behind tall windows, countless lives unfolding in quiet secrecy. Among them, women wrapped in shawls, seated by the fire, sipping the very tonics that promised relief but delivered only slow ruin. The drug that had once been praised as a miracle cure was now whispered about in tones of fear. Families locked medicine cabinets. Chemists grew cautious. Society, still unwilling to admit its role, turned its gaze elsewhere, onto the women themselves. The stereotype of the unstable, fragile, or even dangerous woman lingered long after the bottles were emptied. And yet, their voices were not entirely lost. Hidden in letters, journals, and even fragments of forgotten medical reports, we find their echoes. Women describing their confusion, their craving, their dread. They wrote of the strange feeling of slipping between two worlds, the world of duty, motherhood, and etiquette, and the shadow world where the drug ruled everything. These writings remind us that behind the polite veil of Victorian respectability, there was suffering, silent, profound, and unacknowledged. As the century turned, reform and regulation tightened their grip. But the story remained etched into cultural memory. The drug that turned Victorian women into maniacs was no longer only a chemical. It had become a symbol of how society, in its blindness, could destroy the very people it claimed to protect. Now, as the candle burns low, and the sound of rain begins to tap gently at the window in your imagination, the story prepares to fold itself into silence. One last reflection remains. So now, the story of the drug that turned Victorian women into maniacs has unfolded like a long, misty dream. We have walked together through candlelit parlors, through the clinking of glass bottles, through the whispered fears of families and the hidden diaries of women who carried their burdens in silence. The echoes of their lives remind us of the fragility of trust, of medicine, of society's gaze. And yet, in this quiet moment, as we step back from the shadowed history, we allow the story to soften, to fade like a gentle fog rolling away at dawn. Take a deep breath with me now. Inhale slowly, and let the breath drift out, calm and unhurried. Feel your body sinking deeper into rest, as if the heavy velvet curtains of a Victorian room are being drawn closed, shutting out the noise of the world. Imagine the soft crackle of a fire, the delicate rustle of leaves outside a window, and the soothing rhythm of your own breath, steady and calm. The story has ended, but you are safe. The past is far away now. All that remains is stillness. So close your eyes gently. Let your thoughts loosen like pages slipping shut in an old leather-bound book. You are drifting now. Floating. The night holds you. The silence protects you. And sleep comes softly. Good night.